My sister raised her glass before anyone even sat down. The chandelier caught the champagne, scattering light across the table like this was something worth celebrating. She smiled and said, "To the future of this family finally in the right hands." People laughed. Not awkward, not surprised. I was still holding the folder the lawyer gave me. It felt weightless, like everything inside it had already been decided. Vanessa didn't look at me when she talked about responsibility. She didn't need to. When our eyes finally met, she was calm, certain. She thought she had taken everything. I just sat there, already knowing she hadn't. The lawyer didn't rush through it. That's the first thing I remember. No dramatic pause, no sympathy in his voice. Just a steady, measured tone as he read each line like it was routine. Like it didn't carry the weight of a man's entire life behind it. We were still at his office then. Neutral walls, soft lighting. Everything designed to make hard conversations feel smaller than they are. Vanessa sat across from me, legs crossed, one hand resting on the table like she already owned it. She hadn't said much while he spoke. She didn't have to. The calm in her posture did the talking for her. When he finished, there was a moment where no one moved. I remember looking at the document again, not because I thought it would change, but because my mind hadn't caught up yet. It listed everything, assets, properties, accounts, and next to all of it, one name. Hers. Not partially, not shared, not conditional, just hers. The lawyer slid a second sheet toward me, something about acknowledgement standard procedure. I didn't reach for it right away. My hand stayed where it was resting against the edge of the table like if I didn't move. None of it would fully settle into place. Vanessa exhaled softly, almost like she'd been holding it in for a while. "I know this isn't easy," she said, her voice low, controlled. "But Dad trusted me to handle things properly." I glanced at her then. Not long, just enough to catch the way she held my gaze without blinking. There wasn't any hesitation there, no second guessing. Just a kind of quiet certainty that made everything feel final. "I'm not cutting you out," she added after a beat. "We'll figure something out. Monthly support, maybe. You won't be left with nothing." She said it like it was generous. The lawyer didn't react. He just watched, waiting for me to either sign or ask a question. I did neither. Instead, I asked for a copy, something about reviewing it on my own time. He nodded, printed it without comment, and handed it over in a plain folder. That was the one I was still holding later at the house. On the drive back, Vanessa talked about logistics, bank accounts, property management timelines, practical things. She spoke like someone already stepping into a role, already adjusting to ownership. I let her talk. I answered when I had to. Short, neutral responses. Nothing that would slow her down. At a stoplight, she glanced over. "This is what's best," she said. "You know that, right?" I looked ahead at the red light, at the way it held everything in place for a few seconds longer than necessary. "Yeah," I said. "I hear you." The light turned green. She pressed the gas and we moved forward like nothing had shifted. But somewhere between that office and the house, something small didn't sit right. Not loud enough to argue with, just off. By the time we got back to the house, there were already cars lining the street. Not just family, neighbors. A couple of people I didn't recognize. Someone had set up extra chairs in the dining room, like this had quietly turned into something bigger than just reading a will. The front door stayed open, voices spilling out into the evening air, overlapping. Too light for the kind of day it was supposed to be. Vanessa stepped inside first, and the energy shifted without anyone saying it out loud. Conversations paused, then restarted around her. A few people moved closer. Someone handed her a glass before she even asked for one. I hung back for a second on the porch, my hand still resting on the edge of the door. The wood felt warm from the sun. For a moment, I could still hear the house the way it used to sound, quiet, steady, predictable. Then someone laughed inside, sharp enough to pull me forward again. The folder was still in my hand. Inside, Vanessa had already taken her place at the head of the table. Not the seat our father used, but close enough that no one questioned it. She leaned slightly toward a couple of relatives, speaking low, controlled, like she was already managing something instead of just being part of it. "We'll get everything sorted within the next few weeks," I heard her say as I stepped in. "Accounts, paperwork, all of it. It's cleaner this way. Cleaner." A few heads turned when they noticed me, but no one said anything right away. There was a kind of pause, like they were waiting to see how I would fit into whatever this had become. I didn't give them much to work with, just nodded, moved past them. Set my jacket over the back of a chair that used to be mine without really thinking about it. The smell of food drifted in from the kitchen. Someone had reheated leftovers, set out plates, tried to make it feel normal. It didn't. Vanessa stood up then. She didn't tap her glass immediately. She let the room settle first, let the attention come to her without asking for it. When she finally raised it, the small clink carried just enough to quiet everything down. That was fast, someone joked lightly. She smiled. I don't like loose ends. A couple of people chuckled. She lifted the glass a little higher. To Dad, she said softer now. That part landed the way it should have. Heads bowed slightly, a few murmured responses. Then her posture shifted. Not much, just enough. And to making sure everything he built stays protected in the right hands. That got a different reaction. Not laughter exactly, more like agreement. A few people nodded. Someone murmured, "That's what matters." I stayed where I was, just off to the side of the table, close enough to hear everything, far enough that no one expected me to speak. Vanessa continued easing into it like this had been sitting with her all day. He trusted me with that, with all of it. And I'm not going to let anything slip because of hesitation. Her eyes moved then, not directly at me, but near enough that the meaning didn't get lost, or because someone isn't ready to handle what that actually takes. There it was, no name, no need. A glass clinked against hers, another followed. Someone said, "You've always been the responsible one." Vanessa dipped her head slightly, accepting it without correcting it. I became aware of my hands again, still empty. The folder was under my arm now, pressed flat against my side like something I shouldn't draw attention to. Across the table, one of our cousins leaned in toward her. "So everything's already transferred?" he asked. "Not fully," she said, "but it will be. Soon." Soon. She said it like there wasn't anything in the way, like nothing could interrupt that timeline. Another voice somewhere behind me added, "Good. It's better this way." I didn't turn to see who said it. Vanessa finally looked at me then. Not long, just enough to measure something. There was no challenge in it, no warning. Just a quiet assumption that whatever needed to be settled had already been settled. She lifted her glass again, sealing it. To moving forward. This time, more people joined in. Louder, confident, I didn't raise anything. I just stood there, letting the sound of it fill the room, letting it stretch a little longer than it should have. Because the more certain she sounded, the clearer that small off feeling became. Not emotional, not reactive, structural. Something in the way this had been put together didn't match the man I knew, and while everyone else was already moving on, I found myself replaying one detail the lawyer had mentioned without thinking much of it at the time: a date. The date didn't bother me at first. It sat in the background, the way small details do when something bigger is trying to take up all the space. I didn't question it at the lawyer's office, didn't bring it up in the car. It wasn't until later that night, when the house finally emptied out and the noise settled into something quieter, that it came back. I was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter where my father used to stand every morning with his coffee. The overhead light hummed faintly. The sink still held a few glasses from earlier, one of them with a thin line of champagne dried along the rim. I opened the folder again. Same document, same signatures, same clean, precise formatting. Nothing that looked rushed or out of place. If anything, it was too clean, like it had been prepared carefully, reviewed, finalized without interruption. The date was near the bottom, 3 months ago. That didn't line up. My father had been in the hospital around then. Not fully incapacitated, but not handling legal matters on his own either. At least not the way this document suggested. I stayed there for a while, reading it again without actually taking anything new in. Just letting that single detail settle in my mind, testing it against everything I knew about him. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Vanessa, probably. Moving through the house like it already belonged to her. I closed the folder, set it down, then picked it up again almost immediately. You don't question things like this lightly. Not when there's paperwork. Not when there's a lawyer's name attached. Not when everyone else has already accepted it as done. But something didn't sit right. Not emotionally. Logically. I pulled my phone out and scrolled back through old messages. Hospital updates. Appointment reminders. Dates. Times. Small fragments of a timeline that hadn't mattered before. 3 months ago, he had asked me to bring his laptop to the hospital that week. Said he needed to organize a few things. I remember plugging it in for him, setting it on the tray table beside his bed. He didn't open it while I was there, just rested his hand on it like it was enough to know it was close. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now I did. I took the stairs slower than usual, listening for movement. The house had that late-night stillness where every step feels louder than it is. Vanessa's door was closed. No light under it. Good. My father's office was at the end of the hallway. It still smelled the same when I pushed the door open. Paper leather. A faint trace of whatever cologne he used to wear. Nothing had been touched yet. Not really. The desk was exactly how he left it. I set the folder down and moved around to his chair. The computer wasn't there, right. We had taken it to the hospital. For a second, I just stood there trying to remember what happened to it after. Then it clicked. I had brought it back, set it in the closet in the guest room. Told myself I'd go through it later. Later had arrived. I kept the lights off as I crossed the hallway more out of instinct than necessity. The guest room door opened without a sound. The closet was exactly how I left it. Spare blankets, a couple of boxes, and the laptop sitting on the top shelf. It powered on slower than I expected. The screen glowed faintly in the dark room, illuminating just enough to make everything else disappear. No password. He never changed it. His desktop was the same folders labeled clearly, nothing hidden. Nothing encrypted at first glance. That was always his way. Organized but not complicated. I sat on the edge of the bed and started opening folders, financial records, property files, old tax documents. Everything exactly where it should be, nothing about a second will. I leaned back slightly, exhaling through my nose, letting the quiet settle again. Maybe I was forcing something that wasn't there. Maybe the date didn't mean anything. Then I noticed one folder I didn't recognize. It wasn't hidden, just out of place. The name was simple, too simple. Archive. No date, no description. That wasn't like him. I opened it. Inside were a handful of files. Some PDFs, a couple of scanned documents, and one file that stood out immediately, not because of the name, but because of the timestamp. It had been created 2 weeks after the date on the will Vanessa presented. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a second before I clicked. The document opened slowly, like the system needed an extra second to catch up. At the top, centered in the same formatting as the one I had been handed earlier, were the words Last Will and Testament. I didn't move right away, didn't scroll, just sat there looking at the first line, feeling something shift, not sudden, not explosive. Just a quiet realignment, like pieces finally clicking into a place they were always meant to be. Down the hall, a door opened. Vanessa. I closed the laptop halfway, the screen dimming just enough to hide what was there without shutting it off completely. My hand rested on the edge of it steady. She thought everything had already been decided. And for the first time since the lawyer finished reading that document, I knew it hadn't. The hearing wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no sudden interruptions. Just a long table, neutral walls, and the kind of quiet that makes every movement feel deliberate. Vanessa arrived early, already seated by the time I walked in. She had a folder in front of her, neatly arranged, her posture straight composed. The same certainty she had at the house, untouched. She glanced at me once, then looked away like I was already accounted for. I took my seat without saying anything. The laptop wasn't with me anymore. It didn't need to be. Everything that mattered had already been printed, verified, handed over. Eleanor Pierce sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents with a calm that felt almost detached. She wasn't there to argue. She was there to confirm. Vanessa spoke first. I assume we're here to finalize distribution, she said, her tone even controlled. I've already begun coordinating asset transitions. There shouldn't be any issues. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She finished reading the page in front of her, set it down, then reached for another document from a separate stack. This came in yesterday, she said almost casually. Vanessa's expression didn't change. Not yet. Eleanor slid the document across the table, not toward Vanessa, but toward the center, where it could be seen by both of us. I didn't look at it right away. I already knew what it was. I had read it enough times the night before to remember the spacing between the lines. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. For the first time since I'd walked in, there was a pause in her movement. "What is this?" she asked. Eleanor folded her hands lightly. "A later will, properly signed. Witnessed. Filed with a separate registry." The word later landed harder than anything else in the room. Vanessa reached for the paper faster this time. Her eyes moved across it line by line, then back again like she expected something to shift if she read it differently. "It's not valid," she said, but there was a break in the timing. Small. Enough. Eleanor didn't argue. She simply turned another page, tapping a section near the bottom. "The clause here revokes all prior wills, including the one you presented." Silence settled in. Not heavy, not chaotic, just final. Vanessa's hand tightened slightly around the edge of the document. The confidence she had been carrying since the house, the ease, the control, it didn't disappear all at once. It slipped piece by piece like something that had been held too tightly for too long. "This doesn't make sense," she said, quieter now. "I handled everything. I was there." I watched her as she read it again, this time slower. Her eyes didn't move as smoothly. They stopped in places they hadn't before. Small delays, small recalculations. Eleanor spoke again, still calm. "We'll need to halt all transfers immediately. Accounts will be frozen until the updated distribution is processed." There it was, not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. Vanessa didn't look at me right away. She stayed focused on the page like if she could just find the right line, the right detail. It would all revert back to what she thought it was. When she finally did lift her head, her eyes met mine across the table. For the first time, there was no certainty in them, no control, just a quiet realization that something had shifted outside of her reach. I didn't say anything, didn't need to, because everything that mattered had already been said on paper in ink, in a document she hadn't known existed. And in that moment, without raising my voice, without correcting her, without even moving from where I sat, the room stopped belonging to her. The room emptied in a way I hadn't seen before. No rush, no raised voices, just people deciding one by one that they didn't belong in whatever this had turned into. Chairs slid back, papers were gathered. Conversations dropped to low murmurs that didn't carry. Vanessa stayed seated. The document was still in front of her, her fingers resting on it like she could hold the outcome in place if she didn't let go. Eleanor had stepped out to make a call, something about notifying the bank, halting transfers, flagging accounts tied to the estate. The kind of language that sounds procedural until you realize it means everything stops. Movement, access, control. I stood up slowly, not to make a point. Just because the room had shifted and staying seated didn't make sense anymore. The chair scraped lightly against the floor. Vanessa looked up. "You knew," she said. Not sharp, not loud, just direct. I knew something didn't match, I answered. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, more like she was trying to recalculate something that had already moved past her. "So you let me go through all of this," she said, gesturing faintly toward the empty room. "The table, the document. You let me handle everything." There was no accusation in her tone. That would have been easier to respond to. "I needed it to be clear," I said. "To who? To everyone." That sat there between us for a second. Vanessa leaned back her shoulders, lowering just a fraction. The confidence she carried earlier wasn't gone. It had just changed shape. Quieter now. Tighter. "They're freezing the accounts," I added, "until everything is reviewed." Her jaw set, but she nodded. She understood what that meant. No more quiet transitions. No more moving things into place before anyone could question it. "That won't last," she said. "Not if I challenge it." "You can," I said, "but it won't move forward either." That was the part that mattered. Not winning, not losing, stopping. Vanessa looked down at the document again, but she wasn't reading it this time. Just holding it like the weight had finally caught up with what it actually was. "What does it say?" she asked after a moment. "Exactly. You already saw it. Say it." I held her gaze. "It splits everything I said. Equal." That was the first time something in her expression actually broke. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone else. But I saw it the exact moment the version of the future she had been operating under stopped. Existing. Vanessa let out a slow breath, almost like she was steadying herself. Then she stood, smoothing her sleeve, collecting her things with the same precision she'd had when she walked in. No collapse, no scene. Just adjustment. When she reached the door, she paused, not turning around, just stopping long enough to leave something behind. "You always needed proof," she said. "I didn't think he did." The door closed softly. For a moment, I stayed where I was, the room settling into a different kind of quiet. The table still held both versions of the story, hers and the one that replaced it. I picked up the later will, folding it once careful along the crease. Not light anymore. Not uncertain, just final.